40,000 years ago, you would not have been alone. Walk far enough across the ancient world, and you would have run into other people who were almost like you, but not exactly. Some were shorter and broader and stronger, built for a cold you have never had to feel in your life. Some were so small that fully grown adults stood only about a meter tall. Some you would only ever come to know much later as a sliver of finger bone and a thread of DNA pulled out of the dirt on a cave floor. They were all human. Not your species, but human. And then, one after another, every last one of them was gone. Today there is a single kind of human left on the entire planet, and you are it. We were not the first of these species to appear, and we are nowhere near the longest lived. We are simply the only ones still standing here. Which leaves a question that almost nobody ever stops to ask. If being human once meant a whole sprawling family of different species, then what on earth happened to everyone else? There was no single war that ended it, no flood, no asteroid with a clean line drawn between before and after. The other humans did not lose one dramatic battle on one terrible afternoon and disappear. They slipped away slowly, in small scattered populations, across tens of thousands of years, for reasons we are still trying to reconstruct from teeth and bone fragments and ancient genomes. And the closer you look at exactly how they disappeared, the less comfortable the whole story becomes, because some of the forces that erased them are still completely true right now. If you're enjoying this so far, hit the like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I actually read them. The story most people carry around in their heads goes something like this. There were these other, rougher, more primitive humans. Then we showed up, and we were cleverer, with better tools and sharper minds, and we replaced them. The smarter brain wins. The end. It is a tidy little story. It is also almost entirely wrong. To understand why, start with the one human species that should unsettle us more than any other, because it makes a mockery of the comfortable idea that we are permanent. Its name is Homo erectus. Homo erectus appeared on the scene around 2 million years ago, long before our own kind existed, and it was no clumsy first attempt at being human. Its body already looked startlingly modern. Long legs, shorter arms, a frame built to walk and run across open country for hours at a time. When a Dutch doctor named Eugène Dubois went digging in Java in the 1890s and pulled a skull cap and a thigh bone out of the ground, the thigh bone was so human that he could tell this ancient creature had stood fully upright and walked exactly as we do. Decades later, in 1984, Richard Leakey's team in Kenya uncovered an almost complete skeleton of a Homo erectus boy, and his body was tall, lean, and so modern in its proportions that in a crowd, from a distance, you might not look twice. Homo erectus was very likely the first human species to leave Africa altogether. Fossils found at Dmanisi, in the country of Georgia, show these humans were already living at the gateway to Europe roughly 1.8 million years ago, an immense distance from where humanity began. Their faces were not like yours. The skull sat low, the brow ridge was heavy, the brain was smaller than ours but far larger than anything that had come before. They shaped stone hand axes with real care, the same basic teardrop tool reproduced across continents and across hundreds of thousands of years. They almost certainly used fire. Their remains turn up from Africa all the way to China, where the fossils once known as Peking Man were dug from a cave near Beijing, a span of territory no earlier human had ever covered. And they kept all of it going for well over 1 million years. Sit with that number for a second. Our entire species, every empire and every farmer and every person you have ever loved, fits inside roughly 300,000 years of history. The oldest known fossils of our own kind come from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, dated in 2017 to about that same age, which means that for much of our early existence we were simply one more human species among several, with no special reason to think we would be the survivors. Homo erectus lasted at least 3 or 4 times longer than we have so far managed. If any human ever earned the right to feel permanent, it was them. They are gone anyway. The last known traces of Homo erectus come from a site called Ngandong on the island of Java, not far from where Dubois first put his shovel in the ground. A careful study published in 2020 dated those final remains to somewhere between roughly 117,000 and 108,000 years ago. By then, the world had shifted underneath them. The climate had turned unstable, forests advancing and retreating, rivers changing course, herds of prey moving off to new ground. Other kinds of humans now walked the planet alongside them. And after more than 1,000,000 years of unbroken success, the most enduring human species there has ever been finally ran out of time. We still do not entirely know why. Maybe the last surviving groups grew too isolated. Maybe the land changed faster than they could follow it. Maybe newer humans simply crowded into the spaces they had always depended on. But the lesson lands before we are even properly into the story. Lasting a very long time is not remotely the same thing as lasting forever. The next humans are the ones you are sure you already know, and almost everything the old picture taught you about them turns out to be wrong. For most of the last century, the Neanderthals were drawn as dim, stooping cave brutes, the slow-witted cousins who lost the race. They were nothing of the kind. They were a different and genuinely successful answer to one of the hardest questions a living body can face. How do you survive an ice age? Their answer was written directly into their bones. They were shorter than us and far more powerfully built, with broad chests, thick limbs, and dense, heavy muscle. Their faces carried large noses and strong brows beneath long, low skulls. Every part of that design trapped heat and saved precious energy in a frozen world where warmth bled out of the body fast and food could disappear for weeks at a stretch. And their lives were savagely physical. Neanderthals hunted enormous animals at close range, with thrusting spears, near enough to smell the breath of the things actively trying to kill them. When two researchers, Thomas Berger and Eric Trinkhaus, examined the patterns of healed injuries scattered across Neanderthal skeletons in 1995, the closest modern match they could find came from a genuinely unexpected place. The injuries most resembled those of rodeo riders, people who spend their working lives being thrown around by animals far larger than themselves. These were humans who grappled with such creatures constantly, and survived it often enough to heal up and go back out and do it again. And they looked after one another. In Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, the skeleton of one Neanderthal man holds a story that stops you cold. He had lived for years with a withered arm, a crushed and badly healed leg, and the loss of sight in one eye. He could not possibly have hunted in that condition. Someone fed him anyway. Someone kept him alive long past the point where he could feed himself. And they may have done far more than merely survive. At Krapina, in Croatia, researchers found eagle talons that had been deliberately cut and worn as jewelry roughly 130,000 years ago, long before our species was anywhere near. Then, in 2018, a team led by Dirk Hoffman dated red pigment markings on the walls of 3 separate caves in Spain to more than 64,000 years ago, thousands of years before modern humans are believed to have set foot in Europe. If that dating holds, the only hands that could have made those marks were Neanderthal hands. Painting on the wall of a cave is not the act of a brute. It is the act of a mind reaching for something past the bare edge of survival. So why did they vanish? Around 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals, as a distinct living people, faded out of the fossil record. The old explanation was simple and very flattering to us. We arrived, we were superior, we wiped them out. The real answer is messier and considerably more uncomfortable. Neanderthals lived in small, thinly scattered populations, and small populations are fragile in ways that large ones simply are not. One hard winter, a single failed hunting season, a disease moving through the group, a birth rate that dips just slightly too low for just slightly too long, and a population that small can blink straight out of existence. Ancient DNA recovered from late Neanderthals shows alarmingly low genetic diversity, a clear sign that many of these groups were already running on fumes well before our species ever became a serious factor. The climate kept lurching between cold and warm, reshuffling the animals and plants they depended on for everything. And into this already precarious world walked another kind of human, carrying wider connections and faster-moving ideas. But here is the part that breaks the old story for good. The Neanderthals did not actually vanish into nothing. They mixed with us. Nearly everyone alive outside of Africa is carrying about 2% Neanderthal DNA, threaded invisibly through their genome at this very moment. When Pabo's team published the first Neanderthal genome in 2010 and lined it up against living people, the comparison was undeniable, and the old idea that our species had simply replaced theirs, cleanly and completely, could not survive it. They were not only outcompeted. In part, they were absorbed, folded gradually into us, until the line between their kind and ours simply dissolved. The Neanderthals may not have lost one great war. They lost 1,000 small ones, against cold and isolation and thinning numbers and time. And what remained of them came home inside our own blood. If this is making you think, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss one. This channel only exists because of the people who share these videos, and I don't take that lightly. If the Neanderthals are the humans we think we know, the Denisovans are the humans we almost never knew existed at all. For years, they were closer to a rumor than a species. With Neanderthals, we have skulls, skeletons, entire burials. With Denisovans, the whole story began with one single finger bone. In 2008, in a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, researchers recovered a fragment from the little finger of a young girl. It was so small and ordinary-looking that nobody expected it to matter much at all. Then a team led by the geneticist Svante Pääbo extracted the DNA locked inside it, and that one fragment rewrote the entire human family tree. Pääbo would later win a Nobel Prize for exactly this kind of work, for learning how to read the genomes of the long dead. For most of the history of biology, this was considered flatly impossible. DNA falls apart after death, breaking into shorter and shorter fragments, and for remains, this ancient scientists assumed there would be nothing usable left to read at all. The Denisovans are a known species only because that assumption turned out to be wrong. The genetic code in that finger bone did not match Neanderthals. It did not match us either. It belonged to a whole human population that science had never even suspected was there, now named after the Siberian cave where the bone was found. Almost everything we understand about who the Denisovans actually were comes from their DNA, rather than their skeletons, because the skeletons barely exist. That finger bone, a scatter of teeth, and a piece of jaw discovered later, high on the Tibetan plateau, which proved these humans had reached brutal, oxygen-thin high country far from Siberia. There is even a chance we have been staring at a Denisovan face for years without knowing it. A massive, strange skull found near Harbin, China, and announced in 2021 under the name Homo longi, the so-called Dragon Man, may, some researchers now argue, turn out to be a Denisovan after all. And the genetic shadow these people cast is simply enormous. Populations living across parts of Asia and the Pacific today, especially in New Guinea and the islands around it, still carry a measurable share of Denisovan ancestry in their cells. The DNA even suggests our ancestors interbred with them more than once, in more than one place. And in 2014, a group of researchers traced something genuinely surprising. Many people living on the Tibetan plateau survived the thin mountain air using a particular version of a gene called EPAS1, and that life-saving version was inherited directly from Denisovans. A vanished human species is, at this exact moment, helping living people breathe at altitudes that would leave the rest of us dizzy and gasping for air. But as a living population, the Denisovans went the way of every other branch on the tree. The youngest firm evidence of them is around 40,000 years old, with a few faint genetic hints that some isolated groups lingered a little later than that. Then they too dissolve out of the record. And this is the point where the flattering version of events falls apart entirely. The Denisovans were not primitive. They had spread across an immense range and adapted to some of the harshest country anywhere on the planet. The Neanderthals were not stupid. They survived the Ice Age, cared for their wounded, wore ornaments, and may well have painted caves. Homo erectus outlasted our entire species several times over. So whatever it is that explains why we are still here and they are not, it cannot simply be that we were the bright ones and they were the fools. The evidence keeps stubbornly refusing that answer. There is one more, and it is the strangest of every single one of them. On the Indonesian island of Flores, in a cave called Liang Bua, a team led by Mike Morwood and Peter Brown uncovered, in 2003, the bones of a fully grown adult human who stood only about a meter tall, a small body, and a small brain no bigger than a chimpanzee's, and yet this creature shaped stone tools and butchered the animals it managed to kill. The scientists nicknamed it the Hobbit, and at first a great many people flatly refused to believe it was a real species at all. Perhaps, they insisted, it was simply a modern human with some kind of growth disorder. But the evidence held firm. This was a separate kind of human, shrunk right down to a miniature edition. What made the Hobbit so hard to swallow was its brain. The long-standing assumption had been that making tools and surviving as a human required a large brain, and here was a creature with one barely a third the size of ours doing both. Islands do strange things to the creatures stranded on them. Cut off from the mainland, with limited food and very few predators, large animals tend to evolve smaller over the generations, while some small animals grow larger instead. The very same island that miniaturized these humans was also home to dwarf elephants called stegodon, storks tall enough to look a grown person dead in the eye, and Komodo dragons. The bones at Liangbua are now dated to roughly between 100,000 and 60,000 years ago, with associated stone tools reaching up to around 50,000 years ago. And we know the lineage was on that island for an astonishingly long time, because much older tools and fossils found at a site called Mata Menge push their ancestors back something like 700,000 years. That final date, around 50,000 years ago, is the haunting one, because it falls right around the time modern humans were spreading through the very same region. And then this tiny, improbable, tool-making human was simply gone. The Philippines holds an echo of the same story. In 2019, researchers describing fossils from Callao Cave on the island of Luzon announced yet another previously unknown human, Homo luzonensis, another small island species living out its own entirely separate existence until it too disappeared. On an island, you do not need a planet-wide catastrophe to wipe out a species. A long drought, a slow decline in the available prey, one large volcanic eruption, a few bad generations stacked back to back, and a population that is already small and hemmed in on every side by the sea, can vanish almost without leaving a trace. All of these humans were riding out the same violent stretch of planetary history. Around 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano erupted at Toba, on the island of Sumatra, in one of the largest eruptions in millions of years, throwing up so much ash and cooling the climate so sharply that every population on Earth, ours included, had to live through the aftermath. So why are we the ones who actually made it through? Once you take raw intelligence off the table as the easy answer, a far more interesting possibility comes slowly into view. Our real advantage may have been connection. Homo sapiens seem to have built unusually large social networks, sprawling webs of people and tools and information that reached across enormous distances. We did not only live in tight little families and small isolated bands, we were plugged into something far wider than ourselves. If one group failed and died out, another could carry its hard-won knowledge onward. When a whole region turned harsh and unlivable, people had somewhere else to go and someone waiting there to receive them. And a single good idea, a better blade or a way to find water in a dry season, did not have to die in one valley with one clever mind. It could travel and spread and outlast by centuries the person who first came up with it. You can actually see the evidence of these networks in the ground. In ancient Sapiens sites, archaeologists find seashells and good tool-making stone that had been carried, traded, or passed hand to hand across hundreds of kilometers from wherever they started. A shell that ends up 300 kilometers inland did not walk there. It moved through a chain of human hands, which means those hands were linked, exchanging not just objects, but, almost certainly, information. The other humans had culture too. Neanderthals made fine tools and may have made art. Denisovans crossed mountains and deserts most people would never dare. But our particular version of culture may have moved farther, changed faster, and tied many more people together. And when the planet turned genuinely unpredictable, that web mattered more than brute strength or even brute cleverness. A well-connected species can soak up shocks that would shatter an isolated one into pieces. And then there is something else, something we are not especially keen to admit. We got lucky. We happened to have the right numbers in the right places at the right moments in time. Geography broke in our favor. So did timing. And more than once, so did the sheer size of our population. Our own species had tried to push out of Africa before and faltered. At Skul and Kafze, in what is now Israel, Homo sapiens left bones more than 100,000 years ago in an early wave that did not hold. We descend from the ones who simply happened to still be going when the conditions finally lined up in their favor. The other humans were not failed rough drafts of us, and they were not standing politely around waiting to be replaced. Each of them was its own full experiment, its own way of being human, with a history every bit as long and as real and as hard-won as our own. Homo erectus held the whole planet for over 1,000,000 years. The Neanderthals beat back the ice. The Denisovans conquered the roof of the world. The little people of Flores survived a landscape that would put most of us in an early grave inside a week. And here is the one detail that should stay with you longest of all. They are not entirely gone. When our ancestors met these other humans, they did not only fight them or starve them out or outcompete them, they also had children with them, and the proof is sitting inside your own body at this very moment. If your roots run anywhere outside of Africa, you are carrying Neanderthal DNA right now, today. Hundreds of millions of people are carrying Denisovan DNA. The other humans did not all simply vanish into pure, total nothingness. Some meaningful part of them was absorbed instead, written permanently into the genome of the one species that walked away from it all, until you genuinely cannot point to the place where they end and we begin. So when you use the word human today, you mean a single thing, Homo sapiens, and you can only mean a single thing because every other meaning the word ever had has already disappeared off the face of the planet. We are not standing triumphantly at the top of some ladder with the lesser humans arranged on the rungs below us. We are the last living branch of a tree that used to carry a great many. And the most genuinely uncomfortable part of this entire story is what actually did the killing. Extinction did not come only for the weak. It came for Homo erectus after more than 1,000,000 years of success. The Neanderthals defeated the Ice Age, buried their injured, and may have painted by firelight. And it took them too. The Denisovans, whose genes still carry living people over the highest mountains on Earth, were not spared either. Neither were the small humans of Flores, who outlasted dragons. What every one of them had in common was not weakness. It was isolation, small numbers, a narrow and specialized way of living, and a world that kept right on changing faster than they were able to change along with it. Look honestly down that list, and not a single one of those forces has actually gone anywhere. We are simply more connected and more numerous than anyone who ever came before us, and so far, that has been just enough. Connection is a powerful advantage. It is not a guarantee. The same networks that move knowledge and people across the world also move disease and conflict just as quickly. But the other humans almost certainly felt permanent too, right up until the small handful of generations when, suddenly, they weren't. Every other meaning of the word human has already ended exactly once. And there is no law written anywhere in nature that promises ours is the one version that gets to stay. Thank you for watching until the end. If this changed how you see something, check out the videos on screen. I think they will hit the same way. And subscribe if you haven't. See you in the next one.